we got to page 19 where Imam al-Haddad radiyallahu ta'ala says most of the duties connected to this must be performed by parents and or guardians. Right? We cannot emphasize this point enough, that many a parent demands piety from a child or from their child whilst they don't embody the lofty aspects of the child that we hope to see in him or her in ourselves. And so when he's commencing this particular paragraph, most of the duties connected to this must be performed, must be performed by the parents or the guardians. It is also important to keep the child away from children of people of no goodness or from bad families, which we're going to speak about here shortly. For it has been said that the ruining of children stems mostly from other children, which I think is quite a heavy statement, but it's definitely something that we can see before our very eyes. Right? The nature of human beings is that we are affected by the company that we keep. And these words are from the luminous words of Imam al-Haddad, that it's said that the ruining of children stems mostly from other children. In the volume Disciplining the Soul of the Ihya of the Imam, the Proof of Islam, Hujjat al-Islam, Imam al-Ghazali, may Allah have mercy upon him, has written comprehensively about how to discipline children and bring them up well. And so just in terms of a benefit, just to look at the points or go through some of the points that Imam al-Ghazali mentions in relation to what? The focus on children. Okay. Now, if he says that children have to embody a particular aspect for the children to be what? Personified. Likewise, we cannot be remiss of the fact that what? Hujjat al-Islam. How many of the scholars in our tradition are literally the proof of Islam in and of itself? Just one. Muhammad ibn Hamid al-Ghazali radiyallahu ta'ala anhu. Right? First and foremost, look at Muhammad, the son of Muhammad, the son of Muhammad. Right? That's really wonderful. The most, common name today in this day and age is the name Muhammad. Right? That's a wonderful reality and a wonderful optimism in the ummah of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. We can see from the companions, likewise, if they had a number of children, the likes of Sayyidina Umar, Sayyidina Ali, that they would name one Abdurrahman al-Akbar, Abdurrahman al-Awsat, Abdurrahman al-Asghar. They loved the name Abdurrahman so much. Why? Because it was beloved to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Just like Abdurrahman the elder, Abdurrahman the middle one, Abdurrahman the younger, and all, they're brothers to each other. We think about all these different names. Nowadays, La ilaha illallah, Allah bless you as a community. People come asking us, Imam, tell us, or Faiz, tell me of like a name. And you give them like, mashallah, traditional names. No, we want something a bit more funky. Yeah? Look at Hujjat al-Islam. Muhammad ibn Hamid al-Ghazali. Right? So we can't divorce this great Imam from what? That his father, because Imam al-Ghazali was orphaned, but the wealth that he left behind was what? To dedicate his children, Imam al-Ghazali and his brother likewise, to what? The acquisition of sacred knowledge. That was his focus. To put his children into what? The path of acquiring sacred knowledge, until he was placed with the great Imam al-Juwayni radiyallahu ta'ala anhu, Imam al-Haramain, which we spoke about 1 or 2 lessons ago. But the point being here, what? We're speaking about a man. These people, they speak from what? Their hal, more than their maqal. That we benefit from their words, but we literally benefit from their states, because their states infuse the words that they give. And so Imam al-Ghazali, he brings a number of points in relation to what? How someone should have the tarbiyah of their children, or how someone should be focused on the tarbiyah of their children. Now, when we said the word tarbiyah last week, what did we say? Rabbaba, right? Rabbani. Allah says in the Quran, Kunu Rabbaniyin, be Rabbani. And when they define the word Rabbani, what was it? Al-Arif Billah. Someone who gets to know, or someone who knows, obviously in a limited sense, because we can never comprehend or know Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But Ar-Rabbani is the what? The one who knows Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So when he speaks about the tarbiyah, whether it's I say quote unquote here, mundane, how someone should drink, sit and the like. All of these things will what? Again, habituate the body, heart, soul and mind to act in a way that the best of creation sallallahu alaihi wasallam acted in, i.e. getting to know Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, because no one knew Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala like the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And so the first thing he says in terms of the points Ghazali brings, that it's upon the parent to uproot the love of dunya from the heart of a child, which is difficult if the parents love dunya. So first and foremost, uproot love of the dunya, and then instill love of what? The sha'air, the sacred symbols of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Practice, so instill in your children love of the sacred symbols of Allah. وَمَنْ يُعَذِّمُ شَعَائِرَ اللَّهِ فَإِنَّهَا مِنْ تَقْوَى الْقُلُوبِ. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says what in the Quran? That whoever exalts, and these things, before we carry on, what? Apply them not necessarily to your practice, to your minds and your hearts. What do I mean by that? What is significant or important in your mind or in your heart? Because like I'm saying, you're talking about these are lofty things, uprooting the love of dunya, placing love or instilling love of the sacred. I.e., when we say if we instill love of the sacred, it has to be in what we call awwaliyat. These are your priorities in life. It can't be something tertiary or subsidiary or secondary. So to instill love of the sacred symbols, and likewise instill love of practice. You have to instill love of practice in your child, and likewise inculcate that in yourselves. And likewise what? Love of the practitioners. Love of the people of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Love of those who are religious. Love of those who have religiosity. Human beings, it's a phenomenon, isn't it, that we like to follow. It's not accidental that people put, billions and billions of pounds behind advertising to again capture the minds and hearts of us and your children, ila akhirihi, and their children and their children. It's a human phenomena to follow people. That's just, there's no denying that as a scientific fact. وَلَقَدْ كَانَ لَكُمْ فِي رَسُولِ اللَّهِ أُسْوَةٌ حَسَنَةٌ. But Rabb al-Izzah, the creator of the heavens and earth, tells you who you're supposed to follow. And again, if we follow him, we have to follow what? Those who follow him. Those who inherit prophecy. And so instill a love in your children of what? Love of the sacred symbols, love of practice in and of itself, and likewise love of those who practice, love of the practitioners. That's one thing, again, we've encouraged and we continue to encourage people to take some time away from these shores and spend some time in the presence of the men and women of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We used to see, my daughters when they were 3, 4, 5 years old, when we spent some time in the Blessed Valley of Hadramaut, how they would, the lives of the women, the student body and the women, it's a very, very active, vibrant religious life. So there's female scholars, there's female lecturers, there's female seminaries, there's female schools, ila akhirihi. And so what we noticed that we placed our children, again, that's part of your responsibility. Just place your children in those environments. And then we would see from our daughters that they would come home and they would practice pretending to be Shaykh so-and-so, Hababa so-and-so. And they'd put the niqab on, and run around the house, just play, Alhamdulillah, thumma Alhamdulillah, like you practice the speeches that they would hear. Meaning love of who? Who do our children love today? Who's going to don the niqab? But why do they don the niqab? Why? Because they saw those lofty examples. So to instill a love of the practitioners. And then more so, when you place yourselves, your children, your families, your loved ones, your students in those spaces, billahi alayk, all it could probably take is what? One gaze. One gaze to transform your states. And we say this from those we heard, the greats. And we've seen it in our tradition. One of the greats of our tradition, Muhammad Taftazani, and they say that he was somewhat unintelligent in the beginning of his affair, and his books are very sophisticated in theology and logic, ila akhirihi. But again, he saw who? The greatest being you can see, Al-Mustafa sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. And Sayyidina Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, when he saw Taftazani, he says, Iftafaka, open your mouth, and then he expels some of his saliva into the mouth of Taftazani. And Taftazani says, what? After that, I understood everything. And we have example after example from our own teachers. Someone who's blessed these shores, Shaykh Umar Khatib. He would tell us that he struggled in the beginning. He's, mashallah, someone who's profound in the profundity of knowledge and practice. And he goes that I was studying the Ribat in Tarim, and Habib Abdul Qadir al-Saqaf when he was walking by, he saw his father brought him before him, and he goes, "Who's this young boy?" And he goes, "I struggled in the acquisition of sacred knowledge." And those moments that Habib Abdul Qadir al-Saqaf asked about me, thereafter, again, all these openings start to happen. Not without mujahada, not without struggle, not without perpetual effort, but that openings happen. And we see this in the life of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Meaning, how many narrations are there? The likes of Fudala. That Fudala came out what? He sees, on the conquest, sees the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam at the Kaaba. And he says to himself, because he saw of what in his mind was the disruption of Meccan society, that he intended to what? Take the life of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And so he goes to the Kaaba, and the Prophet is informed about the intention of what? Fudala. And so he looks at him, he goes, "Fudala anta, are you Fudala?" And he goes, "Yes." He goes, "What were you just saying to yourself a moment ago in your heart?" He goes, "La shay kuntu azkur Allah, I was just making dhikr of Allah." Right? So the Prophet smiles, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and he says, "Astaghfirullah." I either say to either he's saying Astaghfirullah, he's telling Fudala to say what? Astaghfirullah. And then Fudala says what? That he places his hand upon my chest. And he says, "Wallahi, wallahi, wallahi, by God." As soon as he removed his hand from my chest, he became the most beloved being to me. Think about these moments, because that's an example of what many examples. What, we can't really fathom, we will never fathom, even fractionally, the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. But just all, again, that luminosity, that barakah, that nur, that love is in that touch. And on placing his blessed hand upon the chest of Fudala, some that came out to what? Take his life. For us, again, there's a type of, it's illogical. That, we've all hated someone, or some of us still hate someone. And we can't imagine a situation where the enmity I feel towards a particular person can go in what? In a second, in a moment. So we have these examples. So have love what? Love of the sacred symbols, which he's going to speak about here. Love of practice in and of itself, and likewise love of those who practice. He says, second, Imam Ghazali, to make sure that you look at the words that he uses: enforce prayer. Enforce prayer. Things need to be habituated. The Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, "Murru awladakum bisalati," command your children to pray, "Wahum abna'u sab'a sinin," at the age of 7. So prior to that, we should accustom them. Again, instill that love. But if they reach their age of 7 and they're somewhat remiss, then muruhum, meaning call them in more of a imperative sense, an important sense. وَضْرِبُوهُمْ عَلَيْهَا وَهُمْ أَبْنَعُ عَشْرًا. And if they don't, they have 3 years to get it right. And here, look, even though we know Sayyid al-Khalq sallallahu alaihi wasallam never laid his hand upon a woman or a child. But وَضْرِبُوهُمْ, and now start to discipline them physically if they've had 3 years of practice and they haven't got it down. Right? But again here, if we go back to the first point, because there's a point that has to infuse all of these points. If our children don't see us exalt the prayer, how are they supposed to exalt the prayer? If our children see us, we don't pray on time, how are they supposed to exalt? Lisan al-hal ablagh min lisan al-maqal. Actions no doubt speak louder than words. It doesn't matter what you say, how you command them, because they're seeing it in those people they're supposed to look up to. So enforce the prayer. And then here, going back to the point that he says, for it had been said that what ruining a child, or that the ruining of children, stems mostly from other children. So Imam Ghazali says, what? Prevent bad company and facilitate good company. La ilaha illallah Muhammad Rasulullah. So that becomes habitual throughout their adulthood. Okay? So if you facilitate this now, again, what the heart of the soul inclines towards. We've taken this hadith time and time again in this lesson. Al-arwah junudun mujannada. Right? Souls will reconcile. Souls will harmonize. So if you facilitate your children now to discern between bad company, to discern between good company, this will bode well for them, as they get older. And we would see, for example, Imam al-Haddad saying this, we would see as a practice definitely in the last 10, 20, 30 years, that even in a place which is as blessed and as innocent at one level, as the Blessed Valley of Hadramaut. Even in there, the parents were so concerned about who their children. Some of them wouldn't even let their children. They'd have like little pens in their houses, haush, where the children were allowed to play in for their extracurricular activities. And outside of the madrasa and outside of their learning, they wouldn't even leave their homes. And if that's what it's like for a somewhat safeguarded community, then how much more for our communities? And how much more when we put these devilish beings into the hands of our children? And now they have access to all of this corruption from their very homes. So prevent bad company, facilitate good company. This peer pressure is a reality. That's just, again, these are scientific principles. We are affected by the company that we keep. Now, if we to give those low examples of wealth and the like, that if someone had, I know, mashallah, Asian marriages, a lot of gold comes with that. Great marriages, great responsibility, right? Where do you place your gold? Do you leave it out? Or do you protect it? Right? If you're given jewels, are they just left where? Cast on the couch or on the street or on the floor or left in the car? No, they're not. Is your child not more precious than any type of jewel or any type of gold? So now where do you place your children? You as parents, you as guardians, you as teachers. Right? Where do you place your children? A crisis that we have is obviously, and we've said this, and forgive being a broken record here, but 15, 16, 17 years of an education system that has a particular agenda. Why are we shocked when our children come out thinking a particular way? Why is that such a crisis for us? Why is it such a how can we not see these things happening? We've placed them there. From our own volition, our own choice, our own decisions, and then we see the consequences of our decisions, and then we start to again complain to God that my child is acting in such and such a way, and their minds have been, or their hearts have been corrupted. And again, the sad nature of us as parents, we always blame what? The friends of the children. It's never our children's fault. There's no responsibility. Again, it's outsourcing everything. I've even said it before, even mashallah, we are so blessed in this community, whether it's the burda on the Monday or the Mawlid on the Thursday or the lessons throughout the week for the youth or on the weekends or other programs that they have, right? Place your children, but even there's an onus on you. What do I mean by that? If I say outsourcing, you can't outsource the tarbiyah of your children. How many of us, when we place our children in lessons or the like, I'm talking about like a parental generation, feel that they've absolved themselves of any type of responsibility now? It's not the job of OCC or the other organizations in this blessed community to raise your children. And by doing so for those few hours in the day, you have not absolved yourself of that responsibility. So I'm saying that if that's what it's like in relation to placing your children in a religious institute or establishment, how much more for placing them in secular institutions? It's an absolute crisis right now. And for those who are blessed to engage the community, we see the crisis getting worse. Universities, it's geared to make you think in a very particular way that is not anchored in any type of thing based on faith or spirituality, but rather it'll help facilitate for you to question your faith in and of itself. And apostasy, sadly, is on the rise. We don't tend to think that, do we? Muslims don't abandon their faith. Why is it on the rise then? And primarily where? Within the universities. So here, look, La ilaha illa Muhammad Rasulullah. Prevent bad company and facilitate good company. And he goes on to say what? Discipline, teach and refine the character of your children, removing from themselves indulgence, love of finery and luxury, otherwise it will be a life that's just squandered. If that's what the pursuits of us as parents are, if that's what the pursuit of us as people who are inculcating bilisan al-hal, these understandings in our children, we are literally fashioning a life that's just squandered in the pursuit of what? Something which is what? Ephemeral and not everlasting. There's a hadith that the Prophet ﷺ said, ما نحل والد ولدا من نحل أفضل من أدب حسن. The best gift you can give to your child, that there's no gift that a parent gives to his child greater than what? Good manners or beautiful manners. And then Imam al-Haddad brings I would say an encouragement here in the next line. He says, any act of religious observance a child does before puberty is recorded in his Muslim parents' good deeds. Okay? So think about that. When you're holding your child as an infant, and when you're singing him or her those lullabies or rhymes or the like. Okay? Anything that they learn, because again, we spoke about this last week, the nature of how the parent imprints upon a child. And not just imprints upon his tarbiyah, his hal. And so there's a hadith from the Prophet ﷺ that says, Iftahu ala sibyanikum awwala kalimatin bila ilaha illallah. I.e., the first thing you should educate your child to say is La ilaha illallah. وَلَقِّنُوهُمْ عِنْدَ الْمَوْتِ لَا إِلَهَ إِلَّا اللَّهِ. And likewise, instruct someone who's close to passing away to say La ilaha illallah. I.e., dhikr of La ilaha from the cradle to the grave. But look here, anything, like if you were to, again, sing religious hymns, religious songs, anashid, or if you were to say these lofty words, and that now imprints upon what the child. What's he saying here, Imam al-Haddad? Any act of religious observance a child does before puberty is recorded in his parents' works. So every time your child says La ilaha illallah thereafter, you're getting reward for it. You are inshallah getting reward for it. Anytime he reads if you taught him or her the Fatiha, anytime he did any type of good that came via yourself. Now this is what? Sadaqah, ongoing, jariyah for you, perpetual, every single time. And we've taken a verse again, time and time again, where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says what? قُوا أَنفُسَكُمْ وَأَهْلِيكُمْ. Wiqaya, protect yourselves, save yourselves. قُوا أَنفُسَكُمْ. قُوا, again, what type of word is that in language? Amr, imperative. An imperative, an amr, a command from who? From God. قُوا أَنفُسَكُمْ. But why doesn't he stop there? Why does Allah say قُوا أَنفُسَكُمْ وَأَهْلِيكُمْ? And likewise your families. Who remembers, we said that even in the books of Islamic law, in the opening paragraphs, they speak about what? The responsibility of those who have people under their charge to facilitate religious education for them. A husband towards his wife or towards his children, a mother towards his child, a teacher towards his student. So it's not just about saving yourself. قُوا أَنفُسَكُمْ وَأَهْلِيكُمْ. نَارًا, from a fire, وَقُودَهَا النَّاسُ وَالْحِجَارَةِ, whose fodder is what? Men and stones. Right? What, again, one of the, أَنَا مَدِينَةِ الْعِلْمُ عَلِي بَابُهَا, as the Prophet ﷺ said, I am the citadel of knowledge, and the doorway to knowledge is what? Sayyidina Ali ibn Abi Talib. So his comment on this particular verse from the Quran is what? عَلِّمُوهُمْ عَدِّبُوهُمْ. Make sure that you're what's the saving yourselves and your families from a fire? It's to educate them in Islamic knowledge, and likewise teach them good manners. This then transfers to his children, onto their children. Sayyidina Ali Zayn al-Abidin says what? The verse means, مُرُوهُمْ بِطَاعَةِ اللَّهِ. Command your children to be obedient, to obey Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Command them. Command them to be obedient to Allah, وَعَلِّمُوهُمُ الْخَيْرِ, and teach them goodness. Until what? Again, these are products of who? So Sayyidina Ali is the product of who? The Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Sayyidina Hussein is the product of who? Sayyidina Ali ibn Abi Talib. Sayyidina Zayn al-Abidin is the product of who? Sayyidina al-Hussein. Until they reach these maqamat, these stations. They say that Sayyidina Ali Zayn al-Abidin was what? Was praying, and his house gets set alight. And so they say, Ya, meaning they address him as the son of the Prophet ﷺ in relation to obviously him being from the lineage. And they're shouting his name, and they say he doesn't get up from sajda until he's finished his complete sajda, and then he gets up and then he departs. And they say, didn't you hear us scream, shout your name? The house was on fire. And he says, what? Another fire preoccupied me from this fire. at that moment. And these are what? Like these tend to be asatir al-awwaleen, don't they? Just like they're almost like fairy tales. Save that what? We had a gathering once with these scholars from South London and Habib Kadhim. And they were asking this question that we tend to ask a lot. What's one of the most preeminent ways to give tarbiyah of your children? And he says what? Teach your children the stories of the Salihin. Right? Allow them to fall in love with these great human beings. Allow them to get to know these wonderful narratives. And then see how that what? Transforms their beings. And so here, discipline your children. Teach them. Refine their character. And then he goes on to say that the first growth in a child, or is a child's in a child's understanding, is to what? They should feel shame or shyness towards the immoral. Right? And this is predicated upon what? Or it can only be predicated upon what? A sound fitrah. A wholesome fitrah. A wholesome nature. Because now it's the case of what? Either a child is neutral, or a youth, I should say, is neutral towards sin. I.e., they don't deem it anything. They don't deem it anything significant. Or la qadar Allah. What's worse than that is when they're immersed in sin that you see it as something enjoyable. Hasha. Because he's saying here what? That the first growth development in a child is the understanding that you should feel some type of shame towards things which are what? Immoral. Which is why the Prophet ﷺ said what? How do you define al-itham, sin? مَا حَاكَ فِي النَّفْسِ وَتَرَدَّدَ فِي الصَّدْرِ. Something that should naturally not feel right to you. You should feel disturbed, either at the mention of sin, either at the seeing, God forbid, of sin, and even more so if someone perpetrates sin. Al-itham مَا حَاكَ فِي النَّفْسِ وَتَرَدَّدَ فِي الصَّدْرِ. It should literally resonate in your heart that something is not right. وَإِنْ نَفْتَاكَ النَّاسِ وَنَفْتَوْكَ. Even if people give you ruling after ruling after ruling, if the fitrah is salim, if your nature is natural, and we live very abnormal, unnatural lives, but if the fitrah is salim, you're going to find people being very disturbed at sin. But if we feel nothing towards sin, and it's difficult, isn't it? Meaning, two similar examples. One was, again, being in a traditional community for a number of years, and then coming from there directly to the UK after a period of 8 years. When you first come, again, after you've been in a wholesome environment, and people can feel this likewise when they go for what? Umrah or Hajj or the like. That when you come back, there's an immediate, because you've had a chance of what? Hearing the adhan in and of itself, making sure that the devils flee. Being in situations where you're not exposed to things you shouldn't see. Here we walk out on the roads and we see things where, again, the heart starts to what? Normalizes all these things. So how can the heart, what? Feel a repulsion towards this if we're just awash with it? These are things where, lowering your gaze, it's not something that that's inconsequential, because the imagery of what evoked of placing all of those, God forbid, black marks on your heart. What does the Prophet say in the hadith? Hatta yughallaf, until it's literally encapsulated. Now the heart, now you're walking dead. You're literally walking dead. But if go do i'tikaf for 10 days, and immediately when you come out, how do you feel? That's 10 days. So you have to have those moments, even if we're in this environment, where you have your khalwa, or you have your moments, schedule your moments with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And again, allow that to infuse your homes, particularly so your children see this. So that children by their nature are what? Or they should be what? Shy. They should be shy. Ibn Hajar Asqalani says that al-haya, that modesty or shyness, it's from the distinct traits of human beings which discerns you from the animal kingdom. We should feel shy. إِذَا لَا تَسْتَهِي فَاسْنَعْ مَا شِئْتَ. The Prophet ﷺ said what? From the words that people understood, مِنْ كَلَامْ نَبُوَّةِ الْأُولَى. from the words of first prophecy. The ulama say what? This is from the Sharia of Adam alayhi salam. And it was continued with every single prophet after him. That إِذَا لَا تَسْتَهِ فَاسْنَا مَا شِئْتَ. If you feel no shyness, if you feel no modesty, the hadith literally says what? فَاسْنَا مَا شِئْتَ. Do as you please. But it means what? If you have no shyness, you will do as you please. You've removed that protective veil. But it's interesting here that what? That the Prophet is hailing these words back to what? The time of Adam alayhi salam. I.e., it's fitrawi. It's something unique, innate to human beings from the first human being created. Prophet after prophet after prophet. Until Sayyid al-Khalq kana ahya min al-adra'i fi khidriha. That's the description of the most bravest and courageous of men. That he was more shy than an unmarried young girl in the quarters of her own home. And he's the qudwa, as we spoke about. He's the example. Now that's been what? Stripped. Stripped from us as a community. Stripped from us, stripped from our children. And it's before our very eyes, it's only what? It's only getting worse. And so here he brings a hadith that towards the end of time about the increase of what? Immorality. He says, min ashrat as-sa'a, that the Prophet ﷺ said, from the signs of the hour, and yurfa' al-ilm. And again, we'd say that these are all what? Consequences of what came before. So first and foremost, knowledge is now starting to depart from this earth. We're speaking about true knowledge, sacred knowledge, knowledge that illuminates. Ilm lam'un. That from the signs of the end of time is that knowledge will be raised, وَيَظْهَرْ الجهل. And obviously the consequence of what? Knowledge being removed is that ignorance becomes widespread. As the Prophet said, that people وَيَأْخُذْ عَلَى رُؤُوسِهِمُ الْجُهَلَاء. That towards the end of time, people are going to take stupid folk as leaders. You know, Donald comes to mind. Right? That towards the end of time, people would take stupid folk as leaders. But what did the Prophet say? حَيْثَمَا تَكُنُّ الْأُمَّةِ يَكُنُّ الْوُلَاةِ. Leaders are a reflection of what? Their communities. Trump is a reflection of that community. Leaders in our communities, if we say it, religious figures, likewise they're a reflection of what? Our community. And so knowledge will be removed, ignorance will become widespread, وَيُشْرَبُ الْخَمَرُ. And again, people will be partaking of intoxicants, of wine. Khamar, here it says specifically in the hadith, and they say that that's one of the most ugliest of vices, is khamar. Khamar in language, what's the khimar, sisters, in language? The veil, isn't it? Why is khamar called khamar? Because yughatti al-aql, because it veils the intellect. That's literally again clues in the word here. That those who engage, God forbid, in khamar, they say that they came to a person, the story they give from the Salihin, that they came to a person in prison and they gave him options to be released. Either he should kill someone or fornicate with a woman that they would bring before him, and they brought a woman before him, or drink alcohol. So the logical mind said what? The religious mind says no to all three. But the logical mind said what? I'll drink the alcohol. It's better than perpetrating, God forbid, fornication, and obviously better than taking the life of someone. And they say that he drinks until they get him drunk. He fornicated with a woman and then killed her. So you can see that, again, consequences, removal of knowledge, the widespread nature, God forbid, of ignorance, the consumption of alcohol, وَيَظْهَرَ الزِّنَا, and therefore fornication becomes widespread, إِلَى آخِرِهِ. The fifth thing that which he speaks about is what? That the first control, the challenge that should be again instilled in a child of self-control is related to what? And I'd say it's related, it's addressed to adults more so. As I say here, with strawberry milkshake and coffee in my hand. Yeah? What's the first type of self-control that should be instilled in a child? His desire for food. And so Imam Ghazali, he says that, which is why if we look at the tarbiyah of the Prophet ﷺ speaking to youth, Ya ghulam kul bi yaminik, right? Eat with your right hand. Okay. Now we know obviously that the devil eats with what? His left. But if you notice with children, why is it that they automatically or naturally go and eat with the left? It's as if, again, you have to, again, habituate the child into these practices. And we may deem these things insignificant, right? But he says, Kul bi yaminik, sammillah, say bismillah, wa kul bi yaminik, and eat with your right hand, and kul bima yalik, and eat that which is closest to you. Imam Ghazali goes on to say what? In relation to the tarbiyah of a parent towards his child. And again, ask yourselves these questions in your own time. Sometimes only give your child bread and nothing else. Why? So he becomes accustomed to realizing that variety is not always available. And I've said this to you again, time and time again. In the Arba'in fi Usul al-Din, again, Imam Ghazali, what does he say? What type of bread should you accustom your child to eating? Allah yubarak fi. Stale bread. Stale bread. I've said this many, when you read the tarbiyah of Imam Ghazali in the Ihya and the like, today what would happen if you did these things? Make your child sleep on the floor without pillows, without blankets, get them accustomed to sleeping on hard floors, give them stale bread. They'd call social services now. Yeah? But what does he go on to say about the stale bread? He said if you want to be excessive, in terms of go beyond that, he goes, you can put some salt on the bread, on the stale bread. But he's saying here again, accustom yourself to doing this with your child so he or she knows that variety is not always available. They should be accustomed to disliking large quantities and trained to give the better or best part of the food, ithar, to others, and they should habituate upon this until what? That they pay little attention to food. Right? They should pay little attention to food. I would recommend that you'll listen to a lecture by Shaykh Noor. I think it's on YouTube because that's where I saw it. Or maybe someone passed it on to me, where he speaks about the relationship in relation to his opinion of Muslims today and food. And he actually says what? That he believes that as Muslims, he's speaking specifically about Muslims, that we're addicted to food. That we are literally addicted to it. Okay, why do you think he comes to that conclusion? He's saying that particularly like in the West, we will justify that in our minds by saying what? I don't do drugs, I don't drink alcohol, I don't go to the pub, I don't go to a club, and let me do this. Yeah, at least let me eat. Let me have my burger. That's literally our addiction. Because it may be halal, but it's definitely not tayyib. But I think you should actually listen to that lecture. It's a really interesting lecture about it's an interesting lecture about food in and of itself, but particularly our relationship with food. And it's so antithetical to the first and most perfect generation. Again, those that came after them. But what we're speaking about here is what? Even this particular point, and this is one that that highlights our difference in relation to the tarbiyah of the ancients and our tarbiyah, but all of those other points, how many of those can we say where we apply 50%, 60%, 70%, 5%? But again here, don't try and instill those things in your children whilst you're eating in an excessive fashion, right? But here again, what's one of the benefits of doing these things from youth? Because what do we call the desire for food? Appetites. Right? It's an appetite, isn't it? And there's two main types of appetite. There's the appetite for food and there's sexual appetites. Which is why, what did the Prophet ﷺ say? Sallallahu alayhi wa alihi wa sallama. He goes that whoever can mandamina, guarantee or secure, i.e. have self-control over what's between his two jaws and his two thighs, then I will guarantee for that person heaven in and of itself. There's a relationship i.e., a child obviously is too young to engage in any type of promiscuous immorality. But if you allow their appetites to run amok, this now will have consequences to their sexual morality as they get older. Because the appetite is wanton. It's allowed to roam. And look, why is the Prophet relating those two things together? Because it's those appetites that you have to have control over. But the first one in relation to what? Guaranteeing what resides between the two jaws. That one we can do from a very young age. And what we're saying here is that you get a child accustomed to doing that, they won't have sexual immorality thereafter. And then the last few points here, inshallah, end on these, about clothing. There's one word which comes to mind when I think about the Shama'il chapter of the clothing of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. From the commentaries where, for example, he wakes up and then he takes a cloak and he tries to put it on sallallahu alaihi wasallam, but it's too small for him, which means maybe someone had given that as a gift or the like. And so he just wrapped it as a knot, wrapped it in a knot around his cloak as a cloak and then prayed. That when you look at the Prophet's relationship with clothing, it's absolute indifference. And likewise when it comes to food. He's just indifferent. There's things which we know, even when they speak about the favorite article of clothing for the Prophet ﷺ was what? The qamis, the long shirt. And they say, why? Because two reasons. One, it was astar, it was more covering. And secondly, because it was functional. So there's a practicality to his relationship with clothing, but at best it's what? It's indifference. And so Imam al-Ghazali says what? Clothing have a preference for white and an absolute disdain for silk, as in true men should stay away from silk. And again, he goes on to say, if these things that we've mentioned, particularly here in relation to the last two, if they're neglected in early years, if we neglect these things in early years, it leads to what? A child that will grow up to be ill-natured, dishonest, envious, and he goes on. Consequences to these things. You may think you're doing right by your child by spoiling him or her. But even the word spoil, it's not a positive word, is it? You don't want to spoil your child. You don't want to ruin your child. And he goes on speaking of what? Ill-natured, dishonest, envious, la qadar Allah, God forbid. And then he goes on to say that good traits though, so when inshallah we see good traits manifest in our children, they should be praised and recognized and rewarded. But praising and more also, when we speak about disciplining, scolding is a skill. Right? Some people are too heavy when it comes to both things. Overpraising their children, my child can do no wrong, or scolding their children in a way that's not befitting as well. That's something that people need to understand. We see again wonderful practices in the valley of Hadramaut. That the schedule there is you wake up before Fajr. So all the students are in the Musalla before Fajr. And there's particular adhkar that you have to read. Then you read your Fajr prayer. Then you read your adhkar after that. And then you have your lessons straight after. And so the youth that come to that program, the youngsters, natural that they'll what? Doze off or fall asleep. And what I would notice from teachers, that how would they... you shouldn't fall asleep in a lesson. I see it in this lesson many times, but inshallah you're excused. I blame that on myself. But how would they rectify this situation? Would they call the child out in front of everyone? Would they raise their voices saying, wake up so-and-so? They would literally do this. They would teach, and they would stop, pause, and look at... Sorry, Abdul Qadir. They would look at the child, not say a word, for like 1-2 seconds, and then they would carry on. Why would they do that? That's your cue to wake him up. You see, they didn't highlight this person was sleeping. They didn't mention his name. They didn't raise their voice. They didn't say anything. So they'd be teaching, and then they'd stop, look at the child that was sleeping, 1-2 seconds, and then carry on teaching. And then the person next to them would realize they would have to wake the person up. It's lutf, isn't it? There's a nice way of doing it. There's a nice way of scolding, quote-unquote, someone. He says here that if occasional wrongs are noticed, you notice occasional wrongs from your child, you should pretend to not notice them, i.e., let them go. That if it's every now and then, let it go. Especially, he says, if a child tries to hide it. Okay, why? Why if a child tries to hide it? Because there's a shame associating that this isn't a bad thing. So it's a recognition by the child that he or she should not be doing this. And so if you notice those things and they're intermittent, he says let it go. If it's repeated, if we say in the class context specifically, but likewise if there's other siblings, should you rebuke your child in front of the other siblings? No, even here, he says what? Ghazali says, take your child to the side and privately scold him, and not at length. Right? Why do you think he says not at length? Why should you not scold your child at length? Have a go. It will exactly, the effect will start to what? Wane. A parent should have haiba, both a father and mother, but a father more so. That they should have a haiba, like an awe in the eyes of their children. You know, many of our blessed brothers and sisters try to be friends with their children. You are not their friend. You are their guardian, their protector, their provider, their mother, their father. You're not here to be friends. I'm not saying not to be friendly with your child, but you are not friends with your children. They should have a sense of awe. Because when it becomes time to rebuke, and every child will be rebuked. There's none of us, we were children, we remember. I've still got the bruises from my mother's heels. Allah bless her. I don't think she should mind me saying that. We've all been children, right? So maintain a level of what? Honor, dignity in the eyes of your children. He ends by saying a couple of things which we'll just go through quickly. That don't allow your children to sleep during the day, apart from what's known as the qaylula. At night time, they should not sleep on a soft bed. And this was likewise, again, they're not saying anything they didn't do themselves, nor are they saying anything they didn't see from that first generation. Sayyidina Hafsa once, the Prophet's bed was made of leaf, tanned skin, and date palm leaves. And it was not, you'd class it as an uncomfortable bed. So Sayyidina Hafsa, she folds it up double, four over, to make it comfortable for the Prophet ﷺ. And again, in assent to his wife's concern for him, he slept on it, but then the next morning he says what? He goes, return it back to how it used to be, because it was more challenging for me to wake up for the night vigil. So here, they're saying things which they did themselves, and likewise they saw from that first generation. So he's saying here not to allow your child to sleep on a soft bed. And then he goes on to speak about the habit of your child to walk and exercise and move during the day. What we have to also understand about these things, what? All of these things have higher goals. It's not to have a six-pack and look in the mirror and flex your whatever you flex. Yeah? The vanity that associated now to physical fitness. All of these things are higher goals. It's not being fit for the sake of being fit. It's not about those 10,000 steps that you're looking on your whatever they're called, those things that you apply to your wrists. It's about having a higher goal about why we choose to be fit. To be able to protect and honor your family. To be able to protect your community when the need arises. To be able to protect the ummah when the call comes forth. There's many reasons. We don't measure up to the women of that day. May Allah be pleased with all of them. And so he says to habituate your child to walk, to exercise and move throughout the day, because it facilitates for the limbs to become tough. A body not allowed to grow fat a body that's allowed to grow fat, he says, becomes indulgent. And he even speaks about the nature of clothing and bedding, which again, it's challenging for us, how Imam Ghazali speaks about these things. But he says, he brings a hadith of the Prophet ﷺ, "Intadru wakhshawshanu wamshu hufatan." Toughen up, the Prophet ﷺ said in the hadith of Tabarani, "Wamshu hufat," and walk barefoot as well. Okay, all of these things have spiritual benefits associated to them. He says you have a stronger connection to nature and being self-sufficient. Right? How many of us, without necessarily articulating or vocalizing your answer, could slaughter a cow or a goat or a chicken? How many of us could make bread from flour and water? How many of us can be self-sufficient in the most basic of things? How many of us know how to take care of ourselves? How many of us can live in nature? How many of us can make wudu from a stream? in these in these climbs or these shows. All of these things about making you a self-sufficient human being. And then the last thing, inshallah, we'll stop at. He does go on. He does go on. But the last thing we'll stop at. He says, accustom your child. Now, accustom your child to not accepting anything from others, but rather to give, particularly if they're able to give. One of the things they speak about is a book called the Maqasid Talim Halaqat. It's the objectives of educational circles. It's a book that's been translated and it's available in the English language. It's a book by Habib Umar, and he speaks about which is an important thing to know. What are we supposed to get from circles of knowledge? And so from amongst those, he's speaking in the context of like a seminary, like a madrasa, that the student should have what? Like a collection box that they give out every single day. Collect every single day and give it out every single day. But here we're speaking about your children. Inculcate in your children either physical, even if they don't have money, place the money in their hands. Whether when you go to take them to the mosque on the Friday, and then when they collect those donations, and place it in the hand of your child, so he becomes accustomed to what? Giving. He says, accept nothing but be a person who rather what? Rather gives. Yeah. The mindset of religious folk should be what? In relation to the relationship with the affluent. You have nothing you can give me. That should be the relationship. One of our teachers who has spent some time in the UAE, he said that when he arrived there, he said that a lot of the affluent there had lost respect for anyone who was anywhere in shape or form a religious person. Why? Because they were always coming to them asking them for wealth. Incessantly. And so now you start to lose respect in the eyes of people. That the relationship from the get-go, people of religiosity to people who are, I'm not going to say irreligious, but definitely the affluent, are what? You have nothing you can give me, and we have everything we can give you. And that's just a fact. But it's almost the opposite now. That we're not all of these things we're speaking about. Imagine you're physically tough, you're mentally tough. You can weather the storms that come your way. And now you figure out a way to hustle where you're not asking people. You figure out structures in your organizations, in your schools, in your homes, ila akhirih, where you have economic structures which are financing the work. So you're not always going, quote unquote, cap in hand to someone. Here though, look, accustom your child to not accept anything. Istishraf, they say you're sometimes you're almost hoping for to bump into so and so because he's going to give you something. Right? It's not in fact it's a very irreligious trait to hold. And look at the words that Ghazali uses here. If the poor are taught, meaning if are not taught this, they end up being what? Greedy. Taking from others is not honorable. He goes, it's like dogs wagging a tail for a morsel. Be people of honor. You're people of La ilaha illallah Muhammad Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Be people of honor. Don't be people where we go cap in hand. And again, there's those from the community that can facilitate things. Fabiha wa ni'ma. But people who attend lessons, people who are behind projects, people who are behind organizational initiatives and the like, they shouldn't accustom themselves to what? Always going to people asking them for money. Hasha. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad. Inshallah, we'll stop here.